Okay, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Katie Malgioglio. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for UConn TAB, UConn Technical Assistance to Brownfields. And today's webinar, we're going to be talking about assessment grants, revolving loan fund grants, and cleanup grants this year for fiscal year 2025, specifically on community engagement, and then briefly mentioning displacement towards the end of the webinar as well. So our goal today is just to help everyone feel more comfortable writing about, talking about, and practicing community engagement, talking about and discussing displacement on these grants, specifically in the context of the Brownfields grants and the Brownfields redevelopment process as a whole. So in today's webinar, we'll be doing a brief overview of the ARC grants. Usually it's MARC, but we're only doing assessment, revolving loan fund, and cleanup grants this year. I'll be discussing meaningful community engagement and how this practice benefits communities, and then going over some grant writing guidelines. More specifically, we'll look at section 2 of the narrative, so going over community need, community engagement, and environmental justice, considerations for assessment grants and cleanup grants, and then I'll talk a little bit about some helpful TAB resources, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about displacement, but we do have another entire webinar scheduled to discuss displacement in more detail, I believe scheduled for October 8th. So this will just serve as a little introduction. Taking a look at the grants this year, usually we have MARC grants, but like I said, multi-purpose will not be available for fiscal year 2025. So instead of MARC, ARC. So community-wide assessment grants are for communities beginning to address their brownfields challenges, and the funding can be used to assess multiple sites within a municipality, start a brownfields inventory, develop site-specific cleanup plans, or conduct community engagement efforts related to local brownfield sites. Assessment coalition grants are similar, but they include several different partners. So they must be led by the state, county government, or regional planning commission. Coalitions can include 2 to 4 communities or nonprofit organizations that maybe just don't have the capacity to handle a brownfields grant themselves. And so after contamination has been confirmed through site assessments and the assessment grants just mentioned, communities can apply for a cleanup grant. And cleanup grants are for communities to use funding to remove contamination from local brownfield sites, and applicants for cleanup grants must own the sites. So in general, assessment grants and cleanup grants are a lot more common than what this bottom row, the revolving loan fund. Revolving loan funds are a bit more complicated. So we see most communities applying for assessment and cleanup funding. More of these grants are available, as you can see in the last column of this table. Only 15 revolving loan funds are expected to be awarded, but the general idea is that a community, regional planning commission or organization, or a coalition of some sort will apply for this funding and distribute it to different entities throughout the area, throughout the community, for various brownfield cleanup activities. So as it states in the name, the funding available, the money is a loan, so it needs to be paid back eventually, and then distributed again. The goal here is to build capital, build capacity, and allow communities to keep this funding going and circling for new brownfields projects for years, even decades. And then, so before we get into grant details, I wanted to go over some community engagement basics. Some fundamental ideas in community engagement are just mutual decision-making, accessibility, inclusivity. So, think about celebrating diverse voices and lived experiences, ensuring public access to important information and resources, and of course, community members being welcomed into spaces where decisions are being made. Meaningful community engagement is also having very open conversations, particularly around community concerns and social barriers. So really getting a sense of the community's history and intentionally building trust. Creating a shared community vision is really powerful, especially in the context of brownfields redevelopment. So, making sure that everyone is on the same page, that this process is collaborative and participatory, that community needs are being met, especially the needs of underserved residents. And of course, environmental justice communities must be at the forefront of our discussions on keeping residents involved and engaged. Environmental justice communities are disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards, including brownfields. They are primarily communities of color. They have been historically left out of decision-making processes. So empowering residents in these communities is crucial to meaningful community engagement. Lastly, community engagement will look very different for each community. But there are some core principles, and they include plain language, information sharing and transparency, active and empathetic listening, building trust and power in communities, meeting people where they are, and authentic connections and partnerships. If you've been to any of our community engagement presentations or webinars in the past, you probably recognize this graphic. I'll just go over it really quickly. Starting with plain language. Plain language is designed to make sure that writing or speaking can be easily, clearly understood by any audience. So in the world of brownfields, we have a lot of convoluted language, we have a lot of acronyms, and we need to be aware of that for any sort of community engagement efforts, and just making sure that any presentations and resources are available in plain, non-technical language. Information sharing and transparency refers to accessibility and widely sharing resources through different mediums, active and empathetic listening, working with community members. It's really important for just working with any people, especially those who haven't felt heard in the past. We'll skip over to meeting people where they are. So this can be in a social, emotional kind of context, or just something as simple as holding meetings at accessible times and in accessible locations. Authentic connections and partnerships is about welcoming community members in as stakeholders, working with them. Does somebody have a question, or if not, let's just make sure we're all muted just so everyone can hear me okay. But if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or ask. So going back to authentic connections and partnerships, yes, welcoming community members in as key stakeholders, working with them instead of for them or on behalf of them, and simply honoring the fact that in this process, community members are a key partner. And then when we lead our brownfields projects with these principles in mind, when we prioritize meaningful community engagement in this way, trust will be built organically. So at the bottom, building trust and power in communities. It's not something that can happen overnight, but making these principles a practice in your town, in your city, will help you get there and make sure that your community is meaningfully involved and meaningfully engaged. Let's see. Oops, I think okay. So getting into some more fundamental grant details, Section 2A and 2B are the main focal points of identifying community engagement within the grant application. So this goes for assessment, cleanup, and revolving loan fund. It's going to look very similar, ask the same questions throughout the grants. For Section 2A, you're looking at community need. So why your community needs funding, what the immediate threats to sensitive populations are, and looking at environmental justice and displacement, which we're going to talk more about towards the end of the presentation. Your goal here is to use software like EJ-Screen and CJust to demonstrate that there is a real need for support within your community. So you'll use CJust, which is the Climate Economic Justice Screening tool. Oh, sorry about that. I did see a message in the chat. I can't access it right now, but I will get back to you as soon as we finish the presentation, or Randy, if you want to address it, that's also fine. But yes, so talking about environmental justice and displacement, we'll be mentioning that briefly at the end of the presentation, and then also having a whole webinar on it on October 8th as well. Moving or Yes, so sorry, you'll use CGEST. Sorry, I lost my place. You'll use CGEST to identify if your community is disadvantaged or not, and then you will move to EJ Screen to take a look at that data and highlight the data that best demonstrates the need within your community. And then, so moving on to 2B, this is more focused on community engagement. So how you're going to get residents involved, what your partners will look like and what their role will be. And most importantly, how you will intentionally reach and include the sensitive populations that you mentioned in section 2A. People often lose points in this section because in 2A, they will write about the different sensitive populations and underserved groups, but they won't include these groups in their community engagement plans in 2B. Or they'll talk about these great ideas that they have for redevelopment projects, but not mention how these ideas will directly support, uplift, and benefit the sensitive populations and the underserved residents that they wrote about previously. So taking a deeper look at 2B, the community engagement section, which really emphasizes partnerships and project roles. When we talk about partnerships, we're talking about connections between two programs, agencies, organizations, professionals, community members that are mutually beneficial, valued, and supportive. So Brownfields redevelopment work, we always say, is not work that can be done successfully alone or in isolation. It's definitely a team sport. Its impacts are community-wide, and the entire community should be informed and included in the process. So the partners in this table, we don't want them to just be town officials or developers. They really need to be community members, especially those sensitive populations mentioned in 2A. If you can find community organizations that really represent them, and include them in their work. The goal here is to make this list as diverse and representative of the community as possible. And this table is taken right from the grant, so it's something that you'll fill out through the process. These are just some examples of.
Real quickly on the last slide, I just want to make a quick note that this table on the new guidelines is updated. There is one more column now that does include the organization or entity's mission statement.
Oh, yes.
We will update the slide, but just so you all know that that is one minor change that has been made to the guidelines this year.
Thank you. I missed that. But yes, so also including the mission statement. And then again, we won't go into too much detail on this, but these are just some examples of project partners and project partner roles. The slides will be available and this recording will be available, so I won't bore you all with reading through this. Some ways to incorporate community input. We think about focus groups, listening sessions, charrettes, other kinds of public meetings and forums. Talking to people in these spaces is really, really effective. Nowadays, social media and online platforms are a great way to get people informed and involved. If your community doesn't have a Brownfields webpage, this is a service that UConn Tab offers. We can create a Brownfields webpage hosted on our website that is really catered to your local brownfield sites, your needs, your goals, and kind of serves as a central hub for all information and updates related to the sites. With that being said, it's also really important to get offline and think about more traditional kind of approaches when it comes to community engagement. So a great way to do this is suggestion boxes or surveys, and of course, having conversations with people, meeting people where they are. So think about, libraries, churches, parks, community events, local restaurants and businesses. And you want to be really intentional about reaching out to those sensitive populations you identified in Section 2A of the grant, making sure that they are being included and prioritized in these engagement efforts. This is certainly something that UConn Tab can help with. We have a lot of different community engagement resources, and we encourage you to reach out to us at any time if it's something that you'd like support in. So taking a look at discussing community engagement grants specifically on assessment grants and cleanup grants. So starting with assessment, we'll take a look at this first point, participating on an advisory committee that screens and evaluates sites for assessment. So if a community is applying for an assessment grant, they need to provide 3 sites to make the best narrative, but the funding from the grant will cover assessment activities for more than 3 sites. And an advisory committee will meet to decide which sites get that extra money, which sites need to be prioritized when it comes to the assessment funding. So you'll want to develop that committee and get that taken care of as part of the community engagement process. But in general, the main idea for community engagement in assessment grants is just building awareness, building education around brownfields and around brownfield sites, and kind of creating a strong foundation for engagement that will follow you through the process and put you in a position for success when it comes time to apply for a cleanup grant. And following the steps on the last slide is a great way to do that. And as I said, UConn Tab has so many community engagement tools and resources that can help to disseminate information regarding sites. We can help communicate plans and advertise for community meetings. And just kind of building momentum and energy when it comes to redevelopment efforts. So please feel free to reach out. We always say it is never ever too early to start the engagement process. And then moving into cleanup, we do typically see more participation from community members once we get closer to this cleanup process, and more solidified plans come into play. So when you're discussing community engagement and cleanup grants, it's all about centering the community. So refining site reuse visions and including community members in that process, allowing feedback and input to really guide decision making, and ensuring that any conversations on redevelopment are very inclusive and very collaborative. And again, similarly to what we've already discussed, we want to prioritize disseminating information, disseminating project updates, just making sure this information is all widely available and accessible through different mediums. This is where we can really put that idea of community members being key stakeholders and being key partners into practice and into reality. This year, the grants are due November 14th, if I'm not mistaken, and a public meeting must be held before then, as well as a community notification published at least 2 weeks prior to grant submission. So these community notifications must state that a copy of the grant is available for public comment and review. They need to tell people where to find the grant and how to find that information, how to leave comments, and then share the time, date, and location of the public meeting as well. Getting into displacement. So like I said, we will have a whole nother webinar on displacement October 8th, but we thought that we should kind of briefly introduce the concepts here. They're important for any conversation on brownfields redevelopment and community engagement, and they're also very important for the upcoming grant cycle. So it's something we want to keep in our minds early on. You will lose points if you don't mention displacement, so let's talk a little bit more about that and what that means. In the context of brownfields and in the context of neighborhoods and communities, displacement refers to the forced relocation of residents and businesses from their homes and neighborhoods. It often takes place when the cost of living increases in communities due to redevelopment or revitalization. So while the overarching community benefits of brownfields redevelopment are very positive, we also need to acknowledge the challenges that inevitably become a part of the process. In this context, focusing especially on displacement. Revitalize brownfields. The process of brownfields redevelopment typically increase cost of living within communities, and this creates an elevated risk of displacement. Even if you think that this might not impact your community, even if you think that it couldn't possibly be a problem in your town or city, there's language in the grant on unintended displacement. So this exists anywhere and everywhere. No community is immune, and you'll need to acknowledge that in your grants. And here is the language from the FY25 guidelines. So it reads, discuss how this grant and reuse strategy / projected site reuse or reuses will advance environmental justice and minimize the unintended displacement of residents and or businesses among the communities and target areas. So, keeping that in consideration, here are some different ways that you can discuss displacement on the grants this year. Firstly, you want to very clearly and explicitly identify any possible displacement that will occur, especially in underserved populations. You can think about measurement and evaluation, so measuring displacement data through property values, vacancy rates, rent prices, demographics. But perhaps most importantly, you'll want to develop an anti-displacement plan that is tailored to your specific municipality and makes the most sense for your community. We have a lot of strategies and resources to do that. Again, we'll discuss this more in the webinar on October 8th, but feel free to reach out if you'd like to have a conversation now or look at any of those resources. They're also available on the TAB website as well. And then moving to this last point, so throughout this section of the grant, you just want to be mindful of the connection between displacement and environmental justice. So really prioritizing those sensitive underserved populations that we've been talking about and emphasizing the protection of current residents, of small businesses, and making sure that through your writing and through the grant that it's clear that you care about the people who live in your community and protecting their rights as opposed to allowing displacement to happen. So looking at some key elements for full points, some common mistakes that people make. You're going to want to, again, focus on diverse partnerships and especially having project partners at the community level, project partners that are representative of your community, project partners that represent these sensitive populations within your community. And you'll want to talk about their mission statements, like Randy mentioned, as well as the specific roles of each project partner, and how that's incorporated in the community engagement plan. So think about how you will keep your community engaged throughout the Brownfields redevelopment process. When will you hold meetings? How will you communicate different information? And again, we just want to call back to addressing displacement. It's really important. Again, even if you think it's not going to impact your community, there is always that risk for unintended displacement. And you need to discuss this on the grants, even if it's just very briefly. You will lose points if you don't, because it's such an explicit part of that environmental justice section of the grant. Finally, you'll want to touch upon the importance of community input and how that will shape different redevelopment visions and ideas. It's just important to consider that EPA wants to give this money to communities who are invested in the people that live there. They want to give the money to projects that will directly benefit local residents and improve quality of life. So I think we'll wrap it up there. I'll stay on for any questions you have. Randy is also on for any questions you have. She's an expert. And then the UConn Tab email is here. Please feel free to reach out. We're happy to, look over applications, to answer questions. Good luck to everyone this grant season. Thank you all for joining today. I'm going to stop recording, but yes, if you have questions, please ask away.